Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out Podcast, a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations to follow their dreams of career fulfillment and to live their best, most authentic lives. I am your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Career Minds. Today, I'm incredibly excited to welcome my friend, Fiona Jamison. Fiona and I have been knowing each other for several years now, and she was born in the UK, but she settled in the United States after meeting the love of her life during a study abroad program at Lehigh University, which is just outside of Philadelphia. Fiona has a Ph.D. in HR management from the University of Bristol and is a researcher at heart. In her last position at Spring International, she led a team dedicated to delivering tailored research, data collection, and analytics to Fortune 500 companies, both US and globally. In this episode, Fiona shares how she moved from the UK to the US, as well as the inspiring story of how she took over as CEO of Spring International, and then she sold it a few years later. I'm just so excited to jump in. So without further ado, please enjoy Fiona Jamison and her clocking out story. Fiona, welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to see you.
Good morning. It's good to see you too.
I am so excited to jump into today. We've been knowing each other through the HR circles here in Philadelphia, and it's been really great to follow your career, and I know you have two clocking out stories that I can't wait to dig into today, and really excited to learn about the second one.
Yeah.
But what I like to always start with is sort of where you're from. Can you share a little bit about your origin story, where you're from, where you grew up?
Sure.
We'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'm from the UK originally. I was born actually in Aylesbury, just outside of London, but grew up for the most part in Somerset in the southwest. And that was kind of where I spent my life until I was 25. And then I moved over here. But yeah, I was raised in a small town, very small town. In fact, lived my early years in a pub. My dad was a pub landlord. So that's where my earliest days were spent. We're in a little country pub in the middle of nowhere, England.
What's that like?
Well, it was very rural. We was in a very small village. And so my dad had had a sort of big career in kind of engineering and marketing. And then basically, I think, wanted to move to the West Country, which is like, imagine when someone sort of semi-retires and goes and buys a country pub and says, let's just live our life in the country. And that was pretty much what my parents did. They moved from the city down to the southwest and then raised my brother and I, in the countryside.
So your dad worked as an engineer. Mm-hmm. What did your mom do?
My mom was, she was partly a stay-at-home mom, but also a bookkeeper. So when we were at the pub, she ran, the bar and the kitchen and everything like that. But when we moved into town, she was a part-time bookkeeper administrator. Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what was it about launching a pub that intrigued your dad to sort of leave engineering and start this bar?
I don't really know that he's ever talked about it, other than I think they had taken holidays down in the southwest and really enjoyed that part of the country and just wanted to enjoy it. And my dad is a talker. He's got the gift of the gab. He's a Londoner. And so he, I think, is also a bit of an entrepreneur and wanted to just build a business. And I vaguely remember when we moved into the pub that it had no stairs to the upstairs. It was hundreds of years old, this property, and they kind of rebuilt it inside and renovated it to sort of a thriving business. But it was a very old pub with an interesting story to it. It had the county line right through the bar. Still there today. It's called the White Post Inn. And the county line between two counties went right through the bar. And so you could drink in two counties.
Wow. So wait, your family lived on the upstairs of the pub, and then the pub was downstairs. Mm-hmm. The pub would close at some point in the night, and then everyone would sort of like get everything cleaned and then you're
Yep.
heading
We'd
up to
head
bed.
upstairs. And that pub now is actually a bed and breakfast, and you can stay. I actually went home a couple of years ago and stayed in my childhood bedroom as an Airbnb. So that was quite an experience.
Did you have to pay for that?
Yes. I tried to get out of the payment. I was like, this is my old childhood bedroom. He's like, you're still paying.
You're like, listen, my name is engraved in the bedroom on the bottom of the wall. I can prove it.
The funny part is that there was actually a photo in the hallway of the pub with my dad outside it. And I was like, that's my dad. So they had historic pictures of the pub. And
Right.
and so, yeah, that was interesting.
You still had to pay to stay there. I
Uh-huh.
love
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So that's interesting. I just want to point out, though, that your dad, you mentioned he was an entrepreneur, and at an early age, he worked, sounds like, in a corporate job, but had this dream to own his own establishment. And he made that dream a reality. And I only can imagine that that had some sort of an impact on you in your career later in life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my dad always said, get an education, do what you want. The more you learn, the more you can do in life. And so he also was very driven to say, like, be independent. Like, if you get a good education, you can be independent. You don't have to rely on anyone else. And so he sort of instilled this kind of, if you work hard, you can get whatever you want, but have a dream, know where you want to end up. And so he always kind of had that. And then my mom in the background was always the homemaker, the family person, and kind of instilled all of that. But don't forget your family kind of values that I think still stick with me, right? That you just, as much as you love doing what you're doing, don't forget you've got, kids and stuff.
I love that. And as a young female, that really resonated with you. Like at an early age, that balance was instilled. And I know you and I are friends today, and I know that that's important. Those values of having the freedom to work on your own terms based on the hard work, but also just having that having those family values where family is important, and that balance is really important. Sometimes that balance gets out of whack sometimes, and you sort of have to recalibrate.
Hmm.
But I love how you, at such an early age, I just have had that influence in such a positive way. I wonder, when did you start to really think about what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I was quite stubborn as a kid in school. I enjoyed school, but when I left school at 16, I was like, I want a job. I wanted to earn money. I wanted to sort of start my life. So I left school at 16, which is quite normal in the UK back then, but I wasn't a dropout or anything. And I got a job at a local company called Normal Air Garrett, which made air filtration systems. And it was like the big tech company in town. And I was a management apprentice there. So kind of worked in every single department in this factory, from, the shop floor to the quality office to HR to marketing. And I really enjoyed having that experience of every kind of department in a big manufacturing company. But I was also had a bit of wanderlust, and I had some friends who had gone like au pairing and traveling around Europe. So I think I just turned 17, maybe 18. I decided to go and live in Switzerland and live there for about a year as an au pair and a swimming teacher, teaching kids to swim and taking care of children. And it was then that I met a lot of people my age who were on a gap year or going to university or doing something like that. And I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. I should do that. I should go to university. I should go to college. But nobody in my family before me had necessarily gone to college or university. So I didn't know what to do. And my dad sent me a handbook. It was called the UCAS handbook or something. And it had listed every university in the UK. And he said, pick one. So I did. without much thought to it. And I picked the one that had the shortest degree program in the country because I thought if I don't like this, I'm going to want out. And so I did a business degree in 2 years as opposed to 3 years because there was no summer holidays or anything.
So, Fiona, I want to go back for just a moment and follow up on this idea that you went to Switzerland to be an au pair. You're living in the UK, and I just wonder, how did that actually come about where at 17 years old, you're leaving home and you're going to go live in Switzerland for some period of time? Like, I just think about, here in the States, when you're a young woman, 17 years old, and you're babysitting, like we think of that as like you're babysitting for another family and they live two doors down, like not across to another state. You left the country and you moved to another country at 17 before you even had the idea of going to college. That's like unheard of here. Like, how does your parents say, we're going to let you move? And so tell me about that.
I think so. So growing up, my parents had this sort of philosophy that you never go to the same place twice. So every year we would go on a holiday to somewhere, just like one place, whether it was like Spain or Italy or whatever. But that was like the one kind of thing that I felt like they spent their money on. Everything else was kind of, general run of the mill, but they were like, every year we're going to have a holiday. And I think, so I already kind of had traveled a little bit with my parents. And I saw other peers my age also traveling. And I thought, well, that's not that hard. And, it was the EU and you could work in another country, single market. And I applied to a job in a magazine called The Lady. And it was literally like we need an au pair for 2 kids for 6 months, and I applied for the job, not really thinking it through. I had never babysat in my life. I didn't have younger siblings.
How old
So
were
I had
these
never
two
babysat in
kids?
my life. And I could barely speak French. I thought, I got this. So I applied and they accepted. And it was funny because I didn't even get the job with the family I applied for. I got the job with her sister, who had more kids. So I thought I was applying for 2, ended up with 3. 3 kids under the age of 8.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember getting on the plane and thinking, what am I doing? And my parents sort of waving me off. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I done? But the family met me at the other end. And there was 3 little kids, all with a little flower, that came running up to me and said,
Aw.
you're going to be our au pair. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cute. And then I was there for months. Like it was, yeah, it was just, I felt like I was staying with another family. So it wasn't isolating so much. So,
And those parents were there. Like it wasn't like they left. You were there in the family, part of the family, and you were helping the kids with their homework and
yeah.
making meals and things like that.
Yep. So they gave me an apartment, like a roof apartment. Like it was just let's actually calling it an apartment is a stretch. It was a room in the attic with a bathroom. And so I lived up in the attic and they lived on the first floor above a pharmacy. So the family owned a pharmacy. The family lived on the first floor. The grandparents lived on the second floor and I lived in the attic. So I was like the girl upstairs, I would come down and take care of the kids every day.
Sounds like a book.
Yeah, it does, right? And it was in a place called Morges, which is right on Lake Geneva. So out of my window, I could see Lake Geneva and Mont Blanc. And it was beautiful, beautiful.
So when you reflect back, what was, you would say, the biggest lesson that you learned or the biggest experience that you took away from that assignment?
I think independence, like having to manage everything by myself for once, as opposed to relying on my parents. I missed my parents dreadfully. So I think I learned the value of having family, right? When you're away from it for the first time, you're like, oh my gosh, I miss my mum and dad. Like you realize everything they've given you up until that point. And then the other lesson I learned was how directionless I was. I was meeting a lot of people, people traveling Europe on a purpose, on a mission, taking time out from their degree or whatever to explore the world. And I had no plan. I had no vision. I was just there doing a job. And I think I learned that if I actually want something in life, I'm going to have to put myself on a path.
That makes so much sense. And it was after that job you began to realize, like, I need to start thinking about what's my education going to look like and how that's going to lead to that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. But I would say I sort of fell into these things. I don't think I was like, I'm going to do this and it's going to increase my comfort with living in a foreign country. I don't think there was ever a purpose behind just that looks like fun. I'm going to go and do it. So, yeah. But I think it definitely taught me that I needed to get with the program a little bit and actually plan out a life a little bit.
So then your next step was your dad presented you with this opportunity and you had to pick a college to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I applied for a couple. I got into the one that I applied to, which was Buckingham University, which actually turned out to be, it's one of the only private universities in the UK. And at that point, I didn't have any money. So my dad was like, well, don't let that stop you. Apply for a scholarship. I was like, okay. So I applied for a scholarship and got like a full ride, basically,
Oh, wow.
to go. And I sold them on the fact that I had already worked in business. So I had worked in different business departments and that I had a working knowledge of French because I was currently living in Switzerland. So, and I was trying to get into the international business program. So they were like, okay, because I didn't have A levels, which is usually something you're required to have to get into college. And I didn't have them, but they took my experience and my life experience as proxies for getting into university, which I think is also a lesson. Like, just because you don't have the right qualifications doesn't mean you can't still get in.
Yeah, it's really how you market yourself in terms of your experience. And you had all the things that were the building blocks of being able to demonstrate that you had the experience to get in. You just had to package it in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I didn't have the whatever 2 or 3 A levels that you needed to get into college. I hadn't taken A level.
So you were really tapping into that entrepreneurial spirit at an early age. Like you had to figure your stuff out. Like it wasn't neatly packaged where you had, it was like this clear path, but you sort of had to take your experience and package it in a way that would make sense of that. And it's so fitting how you ended up in research because that's ultimately what you do in research.
Yeah, exactly.
You're taking a lot of messy data and you're making sense of it.
What do we need to do with this? Yeah, exactly.
That's so interesting. So, yeah. So is that why you chose research? You mentioned, I know you have your PhD, your doctorate, and research was sort of the area that you were going to go into.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, if you didn't tell me that, and I see this, young little girl running around a pub and, like I would say she's going into a completely, different business. Like she's going to open her own pub or she's going to, like, I wouldn't think for a second that you're going to be a researcher.
No. But I think it was things along the way that I think if you have to fight for what you want, you target things. So I wanted to do a master's because I wanted to keep learning. Couldn't afford it, so applied for scholarships to do a PhD. And interestingly enough, a little bit about kind of the connection between you and I. So my PhD was funded through an outplacement group called Grosvenor Career Services back in the UK that was established and set up by Margaret Thatcher. Once she kind of was closing all the coal mines and everything in the UK, they were investing into research about what the impact was on survivors after closures and businesses and downsizing. And so that money funded my doctorate. And that's what got me really excited into figuring out what are the kinds of decisions and how do they impact people? Like a big decision like closing a plant down or downsizing, like what about the people that are left? What does that mean? Like, what is the impact that has on folks, on the community, on leaders, on employees? And I think that's where I figured out you could actually help companies and help people make better decisions if you listened and if you really understood the impact of the decisions you were making. And that's probably where I really started to enjoy what I was doing, because I was listening to people, which,
That is fascinating. I didn't know that, obviously. That's so fascinating that your path of the people research versus like product or other forms of research really started to take shape at such an early age. And so now I have even more of appreciation for, the work that you've done in the last few years related to people research and really what motivates and drives people decisions. So that's fascinating.
yeah. So, and I think that, so I graduated, let's see, I was in 1999 is when I got my doctorate, which makes me feel really old, because anytime anybody starts anything with 19 right now, it makes me think like, well, that was only a few years ago, but it wasn't. But
You couldn't hold out till 2000.
no, I was actually truly determined, because I wanted it to only take me 3 years to do my doctorate, and it was running on and on and on. I'm like, I gotta get done. And I was absolutely dogged that I wanted 1999 on my doctorate, not 2000. And I made it.
Oh my gosh. Are you a Prince fan?
So yeah, and then I moved to the US. So that was
So tell me about that. What was the driver to leave the UK and come to the US?
so before I started my doctorate, I had done a study abroad while I was doing my undergraduate to Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. So just a few months I spent here in the States, and the worst winter I think ever in the Poconos and up that way. It was like 3, 4 feet of snow. I would have been like 96 or 97, something like that. And I loved the US. I liked the university. I thought in my mind that America was the land of opportunity. Like there was so much that you could do there. You could do anything. I believed all the propaganda, right? America, the land, grass is greener kind of thing. And so I had really enjoyed studying there, and actually met my husband during that time. He was a friend of my roommate. And then I moved back to the UK and did my doctorate, but I had a long distance relationship for a
Oh,
few
wow.
years. And then ultimately moved here because I got married. So that was 25 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Oh my gosh. So many things to unpack there. So your now husband is from the Philadelphia area,
yep. He went to Penn State.
and you were doing your internship at Lehigh. He was at Penn State. You met through your roommate, and just what a fairy tale story. I love that.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend long distance for anybody. And back then there was like no Skype, or, we were letter writing. And I remember when we got an email address so we could email each other. But I also think that at that time of life, being apart was probably a good thing, because we both were able to live our lives and do our own thing and continue to grow and learn, and just sort of have this person who was far enough away that it didn't get in your hair. But yeah, that was, I think, 4 years we were long distance. And then year 5, we got married.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that story. And, I think also another lesson there is what's meant to be is meant to be. You obviously, when you met, there were sparks, and you ended up, together for some period of time, and there was true love, but then you end up going back home. And, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And obviously it was. And that's so nice that you ended up back in the area, you got married, and you started your life
Yeah.
here in the US.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
love that.
it was And that's actually one of the hardest things, I think, talking about transitions. One of the hardest things you can do is make a decision to leave your home, right? I mean, when I moved to Switzerland, it was very much a temporary thing. I wasn't that far away. I could get home. I could drive home if I wanted to. I could have taken the ferry and been home in a few hours if I really wanted to. But when you choose to basically get rid of everything you own and move to another country and start another life, it's a big step. Like, and I remember being terrified and excited and what if I mess up and what if this isn't the right thing? And a lot of, I didn't have a job and all of these things. So I basically started over. And that was perhaps the hardest thing I think I've ever done, was just because you leave everything behind, your friends, your family, your siblings, everybody.
So I have a question to ask. One of my first interviews was Steve Meller. I think he's like episode 4. He's from Chester, and he left the UK and he moved to North Carolina, went to NC State. He was a professional swimmer. And I asked Steve, when was the moment, or was there a moment when you said, I made the wrong decision? And he was like, I remember the day. And he said, I called my parents, and it was his dad who, said, talked him through it. He ultimately stayed. But I wonder if there was a moment when you were here, when you either woke up and you said to yourself, Mom and Dad, I want to come home, so to speak.
I think that has happened every year in 25 years.
Why?
There's been one point in my life, like every year, where I've been like, oh my God, what have I done? Right. And I think those moments where you just questioned a decision you've made or a situation you're in, and you're like, did I truly leave the comfort of home and my little England, to be here doing this? But I think early on in my marriage, maybe when my daughter was born, was, do I want to do this like here? Do I want to bring another person into this world here? I think that was for me, because the original plan was we were going to stay in the US for 2 to 3 years and then move back to England. And on year 3, my daughter was, coming, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the time. We got to like move now. And I think then the decision to move back felt too big. So we stayed. And then once you have kids, you have roots that you weren't expecting, and then your focus changes from what you want to what you think your kids need.
Well, it feels like your situation with your career ahead of you, if you could persevere through and sort of, create this identity of Fiona in your family, really growing roots in the United States. Not your true identity isn't going to change, but this family unit starting to take shape in the US, I could see how that was a better path for your career versus going back to the safe place where you had family. It would have been really interesting to see how your career would have been very different.
It would. And in fact, that my daughter being born was also the pivotal moment where I started working at Spring International. So I think I've probably told this story a bunch of times already in podcasts, but when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was working at this research agency in Philadelphia, doing a lot of travel, a lot of community work. But it wasn't really in business, and it wasn't really with employees. It wasn't employee research. It was more like evaluation research of publicly funded programs, and was also really long hours. So I was 7 months pregnant with my daughter when I Googled employee research in Philadelphia, and Spring International, which was called Berrier Associates at the time, popped up. And they didn't have any job opportunities at all. So I called the company and said, hey, I think you should hire me.
Hmm.
And here's why. It was the pregnancy hormones that made me a little crazy. And he was like, well, I don't have any open positions, but sure, he said he would have a conversation with me. We ended up going out to lunch, me 7 months pregnant in a suit that didn't fit, feeling very bloated. And at the end of lunch, he offered me a job and he said, you can, I'll wait for you once you've had your baby. And I was like, this is incredible. And his office, when I went in there, he had an employee at the time called Marianne, whose little boy would come and take naps in a crib in the office. And when I went there to meet him, I saw this little kid like crawling out of that office to his mom's cubicle. And I was like, this is a man who believes in work-life balance. He has a mom working here whose baby is taking a nap, like in the office. And I'm like, this is a sign that here I am, 7 months pregnant, and he's just offered me a job. And so that was the beginning of Spring International. So I went back there. I went back 12 weeks after my daughter was born and started my job at Spring International, where I am today.
Wow. What was your job title when you joined the company in 2004?
I think it was research associate, maybe. And then I transitioned, I think, to senior research associate when I started working on bigger projects. And then, I think I had various titles. Robert, my former, the founder, was not big on titles. He liked a flat structure. So he believed that you grew through experience, and you should have a title commensurate with that experience and exposure. So I think at some point I became like VP of research there, probably about maybe 8 to 10 years in.
So knowing that you became CEO of this company, which I'm excited to hear how that transition worked. When you joined the company at the time, did you have any sense that there was going to be an opportunity to be the owner or CEO of the business?
No, and in fact, it's never anything I wanted. It was not even on my radar. I simply loved the work. I loved what I was doing, and I wanted to do more of it. And the thought of being able to do it with companies that I knew and had heard of was really exciting to me. The very first project I worked on was with Visa. And I was like, this is a company. I know who Visa is. Like, they're in my wallet,
Right.
And the second project I worked on was with Walmart. And this was a company I had read about in business books. Like, I had come through business school, and Walmart was like the number one case study in every book, is this is how it got done. And so suddenly I was catapulted into this corporate world that I found fascinating. And I can actually work with like senior leaders in these companies and figure out why they're making the decisions they're making, and are they considering their people in these decisions. And that to me was a big enough question. I was like, this is going to be exciting. I was such a
Wow.
geek, right? I was like, this is kind of where it's at. I truly thought I'd found a place that was a good fit for me.
Yeah. So for those listening, you joined this company as a researcher. You were assigned to these big brands to research how Visa, Walmart could provide better solutions for their employees that would retain them and provide them with the data and the analytics to make better decisions on how they
Yep.
lead and manage their precious commodity, which is their people.
Yep. Exactly.
But at the time, you had no idea or no even sort of motivation to want to grow to a level that would ultimately be running the company.
Yeah. Throughout my entire life, I would say I'm a bit of a directionless ship. Like, I have been like, that's what I love to do. I'm going to go and do that. That's what I love to do. I'm going to go and do more of that. I don't think I ever had a plan, even though I knew I should have one. I figured that if I just keep making decisions that are in alignment with my values and what I love to do, things will work out. Is I don't know what you call that, but maybe it's blind ignorance or faith. I don't know. But I think, if anybody ever says to me, like, was that your plan, or were you that your intent or your vision or your mission or whatever? No, it just happened that way. And then because I love what I do, and I was lucky enough to find that early, decisions sort of make themselves in many ways.
I love those two L words. You love what you do and you're lucky. And you love what you do as a researcher and you worked really hard. You took on new projects. The projects probably got more and more complex. You continue to add value. And when you love what you do and you're fulfilled in the work that you do in your career, lady luck will appear. And then you can capitalize on that luck. It's not like the love starts first and the luck comes second. It's not like you get lucky. And I think a lot of people, oftentimes, they wait for the luck to occur and then they're like, okay, I love this because I was lucky to get it. But you really have to go down your career path doing the things that you love and you work really hard at those. And then opportunities, which we call luck, is really the universe working its magic and positioning opportunities in a place where it's like, people are always like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. No, I'm not. I love what I do. And then luck finds the love.
Yeah. And I think you have to be open to it. Like, I always had a philosophy of sort of saying yes before no. When somebody says, hey, could you do this? Yeah, I'm sure we can. Let me think about that. But it was always a yes first, not a no, let me consider it. It was always, and my dad was very much like that. Like, does it feel right? Like, don't look a gift horse in the mouth or whatever analogy you want to use. But he always sort of said, like, it's happening for a reason. If you love what you do, it'll work out. So
So Fiona, tell me about the conversation that occurred with your boss. When did it happen? When he said to you, I want you to run the company?
he never asked me to run the company. Let's put that out there. I don't think it was on his radar either. But we were having a conversation about what his next step was. So he was 65. And I was, in my mind, I'm like, that's retirement age. Like, he's going to retire, and then what? I'm going to be left here with a boss I don't know, or he's going to sell us off, or he's going to close up the company. And I was nervous. I was like, I don't want to stop doing what I love doing. And so I think it was like we were just in his office one day, just talking. And I said, what are you going to do with Spring when you retire? And he said, I haven't really decided. And he sort of started saying out loud, well, I could sell it. I could find someone to buy it. I could wind it down. Maybe I could get such and such to be interested in buying us. And I said, I don't like that idea. I said, what about why don't you give the company to me? And I literally blurted it out. And as soon as it was out, I was like, oh my God, what have I just said? And he sort of said, well, I think it took him aback. And he said, well, I'm not just going to give it to you. And I said, okay, well, can we think about that? And he said, yes. And I went home and thought, what the hell have I done? And then I thought, well, maybe it's not a bad idea. I practically run half the business anyway. By that point, I felt like a business partner, even though I had no ownership. And I had my own clients and I enjoyed the work. And so I went back, I think, like a week later and said, I'm legitimately interested in taking over. And he said, okay, well, let me think about it. And I met with an attorney that a friend recommended and said, I'm thinking of this. I don't know how to go about it. And the attorney was like, well, here's how these things typically work out. And so I came to him with like a plan and an offer. And he contemplated it and then ultimately said yes. And we had a 5-year buyout plan, or a 5-year takeover plan, where he was going to retire at 70. And we were going to transition over that period of time. And I was going to earn shares and stock over that period of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that story.
And I think I was very, very, lucky to have someone who was willing to put their faith in me too, right? I mean, he committed to me as much as I committed to him, that he was kind of putting his baby in my hands and saying, take care of my legacy. So it's it was an honor, but also like there was some pressure around, I've got to take care of this baby and make sure it survives.
So tell us, you ran the company for how many years, and you recently made an announcement.
I did. So gosh, what year was it when he retired? It was like 8 years ago, 2017 maybe. And it was in the December, and then I got the company that January. I remember thinking, "Oh my God, it's mine! Now I can do whatever I want." And had two really, really good years, and then COVID hit, and that was, I think, a huge challenge, right, to any business owner during COVID. There was a blip of what the heck is happening in the world,
Right. Because
and right,
you had an office in Philadelphia, you had employees who were coming into the office, you've grown the company, you're running it now, you're, several years in, things are great, you're
yep,
growing, you're like, wow, this is great. And then all of a sudden the world shuts down,
yep.
and this is your first big challenge.
Yeah, and I owned the office building too, and there was a yoga studio downstairs that rented space from me. So there was multiple businesses dependent on like my business too, like as being successful. And what happened in early 2020 was everybody went, "Oh my God, we're not going to survey our employees because there's more important things happening in the world." And so there was about 6 months where everybody just put a hold on the work that they were doing with us. And then towards the end of 2020, a lot of them came back and were like, actually, we've realized listening to our employees at this time is perhaps more important than we thought it was. And so we want to kick things off. So we had this sort of 6 to 9 month, like just dip. And then in the end of 2020, that kind of picked up because employers said, now we have remote employees. Now we got to reach out to them. We got to find out, what's happening and how it's impacting people. And so it came back. The business came back, which was great. And right around, I guess, 2021, we had multiple strategic partners at Spring that we were sort of their preferred research supplier. They were in different areas of business, whether it was DEI consulting or leadership consulting or labor consulting. And we had these different partners who would bring us work or bring us into their work as their sort of data engine. And one of those partners approached me right after COVID and was like, "Hey, we think you could be part of this team. We want to build you into the company." And at that point, I felt like I was still a new CEO. Like I hadn't proven that I could succeed through a global pandemic. Like I still felt like I had something to prove. So I rejected the offer. I was like, this isn't the time for me to sell. I still want to prove to myself. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was very much enjoying being a business owner and being in charge. So that was when the first offer came through. Then there were a couple more over the years, and then the same company came back twice more. So they were resilient in their
Very
desire
persistent.
for us to be part of their organization. And it was a good fit. They were a strategic partner of ours for years. And I knew the people that worked there. And so when we knew their clients and we had some mutual clients. And then finally this year they approached me. And I probably had felt like I was heading towards burnout a little bit, my own kind of personal journey, and felt as if the company had plateaued almost. Like I needed investment. I needed more employees to grow in the way that I wanted us to grow. And so I contemplated their offer and didn't sleep for weeks and really thought, is this the right thing for me? Is it the right thing for the employees? Are we going to be able to keep doing what we're doing? Can we still keep our own clients? All the questions you ask if you're considering merging with another company. And I many sleepless nights, many questioning my decision, going through all the what ifs, that you can go through, and finally decided that if Spring was truly going to grow and do more of what we want to do and help more employers and help more employees, this was going to be the right path. So again, I went back to what do I love doing? And will this enable me to do more of what I love? And I felt like this path was the right path versus me trying to kind of do it on my own. And I think I don't think it was ever my desire to be a business owner CEO. Like that, it wasn't an ego thing. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't care if I'm no longer the CEO. It wasn't like that part of my identity was going to be destroyed. I was like, I don't care. Call me what you want, right? Do I get to do what I love to do? Yes. Okay. Then, I think, so there was a lot of what ifs and, is this the right decision? But ultimately I said yes. And now we are part of People Results, which is a much larger consulting firm that has labor relations and communications and organizational development and leadership consultants and all of those. And we are their data engine. We are the power behind their wings. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I'm really excited about it.
So congratulations, first of all. That's awesome. Love that story. And so you've exited, so to speak, but you're now part of a much bigger company. And it sounds like it's a perfect home because none of the employees were impacted in a negative way. Everyone was sort of rehired and now part of this larger company. And your work, your baby continues on, which is really cool. So the last thing I wanted to ask is, I know there's, when I think about your journey and I think about your career and when I think about the love and luck that we talked about earlier, for people who are in situations where they're not feeling the love, what advice would you give in terms of, like you described a situation earlier where you were you didn't move back to England because of, this mounting sort of family and the, not, pressure's not the right word, but, things started to take root and uprooting and starting anew. The weight of that was insurmountable. And there's so many people, I feel like, in the world who are in situations where they're not feeling the love and they're waiting for luck to occur so that they can make a decision. And sometimes that just doesn't come. And I just wonder if you have any advice for people who are stuck and they're looking to make a change.
I think you just have to take the first step, right? And I think for me, it was, I don't like this current job. I'm going to Google employee research in Philadelphia. So there were two criteria I was looking for: more of the work that I love in a place where I was currently situated. So it needed to be, I didn't want to move at that point. I was like, if I'm going to stay here, I want to be doing what what I love. So that was my first step. And then when the company that I found didn't have a job posting, I was like, still, maybe a conversation won't hurt. What's the worst they can say? No. And I think it's the willingness to take a risk. So I would say, reach out to someone, have a conversation. The worst they can say is no.
Yeah.
And the best scenario is they say, yes, and. So I think it's be willing to take the first step. Like, Google other jobs that you think you might like. Call someone, have a conversation. You never know where it's going to lead. Worst case scenario, they go, no, I'm not interested. Oh, well, let me go over here and ask over here. And I think it's when you're analyzed or paralyzed by fear that you don't take that first step. That's where you're giving up. So, and it wasn't like, I think I think at that point I had already, maybe this is another part to it, but I at that point thought, what is my reason to be? What is my personal value that I think I could add? So before I went on that very first conversation with Robert, the founder, I thought, what do I tell him? Why should he hire me? What can I bring to the table? And I had spent a little bit of time, probably pregnancy hormones, saying, who am I? What value do I bring? If I don't like this, then what do I want? And so I had spent a little bit of time trying to articulate who I was and what value I brought to the table. And I think you have to have that, whatever you call it, elevator speech ready when you're going to have a conversation with someone else. It's like, this is what I want. And even if you don't know what you want, to say, I'm not sure what I want right now, but I'm exploring it. And I think talking to you would be useful. Like willingness to talk to people and be vulnerable, I think. And being okay with no. I mean, Robert could have said no, right? At any point in this journey, someone else could have said no. But you don't know until you ask. So
and you have to be okay with the outcome. You have to be okay with that no, because for every no, there is going to be a yes at some point. And you have to be vulnerable and willing to hear the word no.
Yeah.
And taking that first step. And it's so fitting. We're in the new year. And if you're in a situation where you're not being fulfilled and you're not loving the work that you're doing, being willing to take that first step.
Yeah.
And stepping out of your comfort zone is going to ultimately be the best choice that you make.
Yeah. Ask for what you want. Otherwise, you're never going to get it. And I think that goes in all walks of life. Like, know what you want and be willing to ask for it. So we'll see. We'll see if this continues to pan out. But
well, Fiona, I've loved our conversation today. It was great. I feel like after the 10 years now, I know you, like really know you, which is really special. I really appreciate you carving out the opportunity for us to have the conversation today. Really loved your origin story, and just thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And what a great way to reflect on my entire life, not just the last year. So thank you for giving me that opportunity to have the long view, which I think we often forget about. So as I plan for my 2025 to continue to take over the world, I'll be more reflective.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as find me on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.